Welcome to this episode of CEO Perspectives, a signature series by the Conference Board. CEO Perspectives are conversations that take an objective, nonpartisan look at a range of timely topics that matter most to business leaders. To help make sense of these topics and how they'll unfold, we'll sit down with thought leaders and do what we do best at the Conference Board, provide trusted insights for what's ahead. I'm Steve Odland, the CEO of the Conference Board and the host of this series. And today, semiconductors control just about everything. But with China's recent military drills near Taiwan, there is a threat here and a potential risk to the manufacture of those all-important chips. So we're going to discuss in the conversation today Taiwan's geopolitical situation, the potential impact on the supply chain, what a war between China and Taiwan would mean for the global economy, and what should businesses be thinking about, those that are dependent on chips. Joining me today is Dr. Lori Esposito Murray. She's the president of the Committee for Economic Development, which is the public policy center of the Conference Board. Lori, welcome.
Thank you, Steve. Happy to be here.
So Lori, gosh, everything that we own today seems to have computer chips in it. Most of the world's industry, communications, defense, transportation, energy, all of our health systems, financial trading, electronics, mobile phones, even our refrigerators have semiconductors in them. Maybe you could just give us, to start here, some description of the importance of computer chips and where they're all made.
Well, Steve, if there was ever any doubt that computer chips were extremely important to the economy, to our lives, every aspect of our life, as you mentioned, to our national security, the COVID crisis really brought that home to everyone. The shortage that we were suffering during the COVID crisis, the fact that major car manufacturers couldn't make cars. Apple was saying that its phones and its laptops were going to be late because of this chip shortage. They are central. They are the lifeblood of our economy. They're the cornerstone of the emerging technologies, and that is really what is going to define what the global strategic landscape looks like in the future. Who gets what technology and how do you get it? And these chips are so central, and it's going to get worse. Where McKinsey has pointed out that we are becoming more and more dependent in an exponential way on chips in our technology, in our lives, from the Internet of Things, where everything's connected, to, as I said, our entire defense and national security strategy is dependent on chips to move forward.
Yeah, and most of the really advanced chips today are made in Taiwan. There are chips that are used for automobiles and other electronics made in Korea and Japan and some in the United States, but the real advanced ones are Taiwan today, right?
Right. No, exactly. And that's what is a significant difference and really puts Taiwan in the center of these geostrategic problems that and challenges we're facing. About 80% of the chips, as you know, come from Asia, but Taiwan actually has 90% of those sophisticated chips, and about 8% come from South Korea, just showing you the difference. China does not have that capability. So really, Taiwan is the global manufacturing hub of these advanced chips, and they're going to become more advanced very soon.
Yeah, and it's not the advanced ones that run our refrigerators, but as you said, they do run our national defense and our electronics and our health systems and everything that's really truly important to us. But how did we get to this point, Lori, where you've got 90% of the advanced chips coming out of one small island?
So it's really an interesting story about the 1990s. And a matter of fact, it is so intertwined with the geostrategic challenges in that area of the world, which obviously comes right down to Taiwan. Taiwan recognized in the late 1990s that chips were going to be an important piece of advanced technologies of the global market, and started subsidizing the industry, did major industrial policy on chips. And so come back to the United States, you have Morris Chang, who was at Texas Instrument, didn't get a promotion. Taiwan reached out to him and said, come and build our advanced semiconductor economy, and then gave him the opportunity to have his own company. Apple finds him. He becomes Apple's source for their chips. And that is really the central story of how Taiwan and the Taiwan Semiconductor manufacturing company became so central in this. But it was really Taiwan's recognition that an advanced technology and a global dependence on Taiwan's production of chips. It was a little bit of a risk, but an assessment that if the global economy became dependent on Taiwan, Taiwan would be that much safer. It was part of their deterrence strategy from being taken over by China.
So it was really strategic on the part of the Taiwanese government to bring that important industry there. And there was an intent here to then have the rest of the world kind of protect them a little bit, or at least to protect that supply. So there was a reason there, but it was also a little bit serendipitous that this person was not given the opportunity at Texas Instruments. And this is kind of the way things happen in the world. There's a series of unfortunate events, and here we are. But you've got companies out there that are saying, well, why don't you just move it? Why not just reshore it? And you read this in the paper. Why don't people reshore it?
Well, reshoring, Steve, is extremely, extremely difficult. These are very, very expensive. It has very, very expensive infrastructure. It's not simple. It has to be very large, very clean. It has to have advanced technology. These factories have to have advanced technologies themselves to run. This is a highly sophisticated operation. Billions of dollars to build and run these factories. And so they're not very easy to pick up and move. And that's just dealing with the infrastructure. Now you put it in the economic realm of what the other problems are. Well, there's labor. And especially today, there are construction supplies, being able to actually build something that large, that and fast enough. There's labor to build, there's labor to actually manpower the factory itself. And then there's training and upskilling, because you not only need the labor to actually build a facility, you need the sophisticated labor to actually run these very, very complicated operations.
Yeah, and the U.S. has just passed this bill, or the Congress has passed this bill to try to incent more companies to build capacity here. But Intel is establishing a new factory. It's going to take them several years, and I think the estimates are somewhere between $50 and $100 billion to build one of these things, and then it may still not be quite as advanced as what you have in Taiwan. So this is not an easy thing to do.
Oh, no, not at all. And it's interesting because the U.S. has the CHIPS Act. We're pretty much modeling China's industrial policy. China set out 2013, 2014, 2015 with an industrial policy on semiconductors because they realized their own vulnerability in terms of some of the sanctions and the trade wars that the U.S. was involved in, beginning to get involved in at the time. And Huawei was first among the companies to get hit. They started an industrial policy. Recently, Europe has its own CHIPS Act. The US has a CHIPS Act. South Korea is investing. Japan is investing. But it's going to take a really determined dedication and collaboration between the public and private sector for all the reasons we were just talking about to actually move this type of manufacturing capacity to other places.
And it's gonna take at least 5 years to get these things up and running, and so therefore there's a gap here, and therefore there's a risk to the current supply chain. So just help us put the geopolitical situation now into some sort of context. Describe the tensions between Taiwan and China. I mean, this could be a whole podcast just on the history of this, but just generally, where are we with this whole situation?
Well, the short answer is we're in a very dangerous and precarious situation. It's very tense, it's highly volatile, and it really depends, I think, on two individuals, on President Xi and President Biden, in terms of how they work their way through this crisis. It really began in 2016 to intensify when President Tsai was first elected, and she came in with a much more independent approach to Taiwan's relationship with China. Xi Jinping cut off communications with Taiwan, with the Taiwanese government. That was 2016. Fast forward to the war in Ukraine in last February. And almost immediately, there were analogies being made that Taiwan played almost a similar role to China as Ukraine played to Russia in terms of Putin's view and Xi's view of those areas. And so there was a lot of fear that Xi was reading this very closely to see whether or not he should actually be moving to take over Taiwan and to incorporate it and to fully incorporate it into China. And so you have this escalation of tension. And most recently, as everyone knows, it hit a new peak as Speaker Pelosi goes to Taiwan, and China actually runs one of the largest interoperable exercises that it probably would never have gotten away with prior to her visit, showing their capabilities, threatening Taiwan, shooting missiles into Taiwan's waters, and of course, US warships going into the Straits of Taiwan shortly after that, and again last week.
Right, and of course they built up bases in the Spratlys and China, and also some man-made islands off in the South China Sea. So they're really declaring the South China Sea, which includes Taiwan, as part of their sphere of influence. They're claiming Taiwan as part of China and not a separate country. So this is a really tense geopolitical situation. It's a big deal. It's been going on since 1949, and it's not gonna happen soon. So this tension seems to be ratcheting up at exactly the time when the world's semiconductor supply is very, very concentrated. So that's why I think you described this as a very dangerous situation.
Yes, and what's interesting, if you want to do a drop back to history, it was over Formosa, which was the previous name of Taiwan in the 1950s, that almost escalated to nuclear threats back and forth, and the threat of nuclear war between China and the US.
So, some say that, a war between, a Chinese war launched on Taiwan would send global shockwaves that are certainly larger than Russia, Ukraine, and larger than COVID. What do you think? What could happen, and what would be the ramifications should China invade Taiwan?
So it's interesting because the head of TSMC, the Taiwanese Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, recently said in the CNN interview that it would render the chip factory inoperable if China should attack Taiwan. And that's because there's a need to be real time in terms of products coming in, supplies coming in order to make these chips, and it would make them inoperable. And so you'd have a complete shutdown of 90% of the advanced chips manufacturing capability if China should invade Taiwan. So that would have a massive impact on the global economy, not only in the longer term, but almost immediately in the short term. So the impact would be severe. And as he put it, everyone would be losers. But I think there are really three scenarios here. There's the Hong Kong scenario, I call it, which is that if China invaded Taiwan, it would, the rest of the world would make rhetorical comments, but would be so concerned about what was happening, particularly because of the chips, and also because of their own relationships. So many countries are so intertwined with China's economy. The Hong Kong reaction, that nothing would really happen. Then you have the Ukraine reaction, scenario 2, which is extreme sanctions on China. And could China survive those sanctions is the big question. And then, of course, there's the third scenario, which is all-out war. The US gets engaged. The US wouldn't do that without at least some of its allies joining them. So you have a full-blown war in Asia, which would obviously spill over to Europe, given the volatility with the situation in Ukraine. But there's a fourth non-invasion scenario, which is that China really does take over Taiwan through intimidation, which it has been trying to do for the past decades. where it isolates Taiwan. Taiwan only has 15 countries that recognize Taiwan as a nation. It's been since 1971, not a part of the UN, as everyone knows. Isolating Taiwan diplomatically, intimidating them with military training force over, in their waters, intimidating them through the use of the internet, social media, and how other countries and how other people view Taiwan, and distorting how Taiwan is perceived. So that scenario is actually, I think, probably the preferred Chinese scenario, because it keeps everything intact and they achieve this, what is this core goal? And I would just emphasize, this is not a matter of if China will incorporate Taiwan fully into China, but it's a question of when, and it's a question of how.
We've discussed Taiwan's essential role in manufacturing of semiconductors, the geopolitical situation between Taiwan and China, and what a potential conflict would do. Next, we'll explore the economic risks to the West if semiconductor manufacturing were disrupted, and what should business leaders be doing. We're going to take a short break and we'll be right back.
As you and your company monitor the volatile and uncertain economy, the award-winning forecast team at the Conference Board predicts a downturn by the end of 2022. Recession will further compound the crises that have recently upended expectations, from a deadly pandemic to a war in Ukraine and the highest inflation in decades. Yet, unprecedented crises also present unforeseen opportunities if you have a trusted, proven navigator by your side. With that in mind, and as the Conference Board has always done, we are providing you with daily, timely, and relevant content that will guide the business community through the economic storm. These trusted insights are being gathered on our website and are available to help your company master the challenges. To find out how you can chart a course for the future which will allow your business to emerge stronger on the other side, visit our free economic hub entitled Navigating the Economic Storm, your indispensable guide through the global recession, located at conference-board.org/topics/recession.
Welcome back to CEO Perspectives. I'm your host, Steve Odland, the CEO of the Conference Board, and I'm joined by Dr. Lori Esposito Murray, the president of the Committee for Economic Development, which is the public policy center of the Conference Board. Okay, so Lori, if China then goes in and cuts off supply of semiconductors, what industries and what countries would be the most hurt?
So everyone would be hurt, because technology has infused the entire global economy. So no matter where you are in the world, if you're using, and many, almost a large segment of the global population uses cell phones, the internet, one way or the other, by either going to a hub. I mean, it will just affect everyone's lives. It will dramatically affect the economies of all countries. But which countries will be most severely hurt, I think, are obviously the most advanced countries, the most advanced economic countries, the most advanced technological countries. And that's obviously Europe and the US, in terms of how Taiwan's ability to provide chips for advanced economies, and certain countries in Asia, of course, India, Australia, New Zealand. But it's the advanced economies that would be most hurt. What's interesting is if China can achieve this goal of incorporating Taiwan into China without destruction of the production capacities of the major chip company, plus the smaller ones. If they could actually do that, then it becomes an even more interesting and challenging situation for the United States and for the US allies and partners, because you'll have a divided economy. You'll have China, which will be in control of 90% of the most sophisticated chips manufacturing capacity. It will determine who gets it and who doesn't in terms of trade. And it clearly is a need on the part of Russia because of the technology sanctions we have on them. And Russia would clearly ally, as they have been, in terms of building an alternative international economic structure to the US-led structure. So you'll have a divided world, and you'll have China in control of 90% of the most advanced chips in an economy that, in order to advance, desperately needs them.
Yeah, and it really does feed this triumvirate of Russia, China, and India, which is an interesting participant in all this that we have seen from the Ukraine situation and the energy trading. So, in that case, the energy is a little more fungible than chips, and you see, world supply chains moving around. But that's, as you're saying, is not really possible, at least in the short term, under this situation.
It would take at least, it's going to take at least 3 to 5 years to do the onshoring we've already planned with Intel, with TSMC out of Taiwan and the production factories they'll build here. Same thing with Europe. It will take 3 to 5 years, but the capacity of those manufacturing plants that we're talking about is nowhere near the capacity that's needed in terms of advanced chips.
Well, and just because you build a factory doesn't mean it's going to work, right? And you're not going to get necessarily the production or the quality, at least for some time. There are always these issues. So it is very risky. But you've mentioned Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, or TSMC. And it's important that I think people understand that this chip manufacturing is concentrated in that one company. They have plants in Taiwan, but it's interesting that they've now built 2 plants in China. So when they have looked at other places to put their plants, they've become even more tied with the China-Taiwan situation, not less.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's hard to tell how involved they are in China, but they were saying that 20% of their revenue came from China up until a year or two ago, after this chip shortage became a problem. And now they're saying about 10% of their revenue comes from China. But that's a significant, when you're looking at how large TSMC is and you're looking at that growth, and it may be a temporary setback, but the capacity is still there for that type of.
Yeah, but it still goes to show you that China would get all the possibility. Now, the firm is also a primary supplier, as you mentioned, to Apple, but also other advanced technology companies. Why did these companies put so many of their eggs in one basket?
So I think it really was and is strictly an economic decision. The decision was, this was the company that had the capacity to develop the most advanced chips on a large scale. They're very large facilities. So in terms of production numbers, they were able to ramp that up. So if you're looking at where to actually place your business, and you're looking at it from strictly a business financial prism, then it makes sense. But what's interesting, what happened after the collapse of the Soviet Union, is that what fell apart was the sense and the perspective and the risk assessment that you had to include geostrategic challenges in your risk assessments. That started coming back after 9/11, but that had a particular focus in terms of terrorism. And even then it was hard to get companies to actually incorporate that into the risk assessment. And all of a sudden we are catapulted into an era now where the challenges coming from Russia, coming from China, are becoming very, very serious challenges. And of course, Russia has actually has gotten us engaged in the war, has gotten the world engaged in the war in terms of what they're doing in Ukraine.
Yeah, and I think this and the COVID situation, of course, disrupted the global supply chain, as you said. So I think everybody's awake now and understands that we're in an interconnected world from a supply chain standpoint. And gosh, every decision related to the supply chain has to be made with geopolitical overtones.
Right. And as I said, it was interesting after 9/11, there was a real serious push, primarily by former officials of the George W. Bush administration who had gone through 9/11, to consult with companies about the need to incorporate national security risk assessments into their risk assessments. And it never really has taken off, in part because it was seen as a global economy. It was slow to take off as far as seeing China as a real threat and challenge, recognizing Russia for what was really happening in as far as where that country was moving. And as you know, people were stunned even in February of 2022 that Putin actually invaded Ukraine. So it's been a slow path to awareness how important national security risk assessment is to companies' threat assessments, but it's absolutely fundamental. And as you were saying, people have woken up to the fact that this has to be a part of how you approach decisions. And of course, the chips problem is a perfect example of where you end up if you don't.
So if you had to advise, any company that is using advanced semiconductors today, what would you tell them to do?
Well, first of all, self-sufficiency is not going to happen. It's just a very complicated supply chain in terms of chips. So you're never going to get self-sufficiency. But what you really want to do is, as with all your supply chain issues, is you want to build in redundancy. You want to make sure that your supply chain is coming from safer places, more reliable friends. So the term has now become friendshoring. You want to make sure you're building up supply chains that are both redundant and also are shifting towards countries that are more friendly and share your values. So overall, that's how you need to look at it as a company. You need to look at your entire strategy, as I said, with national security risk assessments. That has to be part of it. But there are also other key pieces to this that really require public-private collaboration. And there's a piece of this issue that we haven't even addressed, which is the rare earth and critical mineral supply that are important for the chips development and manufacturing. And so the private sector needs to really collaborate closely, and the government needs to collaborate closely with business in terms of where are they putting their resources, where are they looking to establish their bases, what companies are our large companies working with, and what's in the interests of how do we move out of the situation we're in where 90% of the chips come from one country. How do we build those capacities elsewhere, and encouraging these companies to move into onshore here and in Europe. So there's a lot of collaboration. And then of course you have the labor shortage problem and the training that needs to take place, and companies investing in the training so that we could have a workforce that can address these issues.
Yeah, but I think this point about, the public-private, partnership and collaboration is really important, and communication. There needs to be, some prioritization of what's strategically necessary for defense, for our economy and everything else. And that has to be done, collaboratively. And so there needs to be a different spirit between Washington and the rest of the country, that, we're all on the same side here. And I think that has eroded a little bit, and it's something that's required to come back.
Oh, it's fundamental. It's absolutely fundamental. Or we'll never be able to deal with these types of challenges and the enormity of them.
Yeah, no, it's exactly right. Lori Esposito Murray, as always, a geopolitical expert and public policy expert. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Steve. As I said, always my pleasure to discuss these important issues with you.
And thanks to all of you for listening in to CEO Perspectives. Every week, we'll be joined by a prominent thought leader discussing the insights on the issues of our time. We'll deal with issues related to geopolitics, economics, public policy, ESG, human capital, and more. Please share CEO Perspectives with everybody you know. Put it on your social networks. We want everybody to benefit from the insights that we are covering with these experts. I'm Steve Odland, and this series has been brought to you by the Conference Board.